Hello, Alex. How are you?
Well, hello everybody. I'm great and great to be here on your Reedsy live event. Hi everybody in the world. Right. I think before we dive in, the agenda you've seen, we're going to be looking at some market facts and developments. And we will talk about today, how can you as a writer make sense of Amazon data in a way that does not overwhelm you? We're going to open our vault a bit to share some of the latest market data that we measured. So whether you're an author or publisher, I also heard there are some editors out there, and it's going to be good for you as well to stay tuned to the latest trends. So I look forward to this. We're going to have a presentation probably about 20-30 minutes, and then an open question and answers. And as Martin said, repost your questions. I think who shouts loudest gets probably the quickest answer. So I look forward to this. And the format is going to be that I'm going to go through a couple of slides because we will talk about numbers, and that's probably better if you also have some exhibit on your screen so that you can follow along. And Martin is going to master this whole thing. So whenever he thinks he should be showing my face, he will be showing my face rather than the boring numbers. So I'd say without further ado, let's jump right into it, Martin. All right, so give Martin a thumbs up if you can see this on your screens. The title of today's seminar is going to be Hot Book Market Niches and Amazon Market Trends 2019. Now, obviously, I too don't have a crystal ball, but we're going to look at some of the developments that we've seen, and from there we might also look a little bit into the future. Martin, since people have seen the agenda, I'd say let's jump right into the first agenda item, which will be the market facts and developments. All right, let's go right in there. Now, before we jump into numbers, it's always important to set the scene. And I know many authors, writers, you don't look at numbers all day long. Well, although I had a client who was a former nuclear scientist, so it came very natural to her. But, by and large, people want to write their books, they're artists. But let me tell you that the data and the arts have been closely linked, for many, many years. You go back to Leonardo da Vinci and you will look at things like golden ratio and the mathematics of perspective. So where arts meets the science, some very interesting things can happen. So don't be afraid. It's going to be simple. It's going to be fun. And when you have questions, do ask them. And we're going to look into numbers, but in a way that you can digest. So with this, let's jump right into the big question. Well, many of you have ebooks published, predominantly, I assume, on the Kindle market, which is still clearly the market leader. And the big question also when you follow the media as well is ebook growing, is it shrinking, etc. So let's look at a number of facts and also at some of the indicators. Well, first of all, you may have heard that, as the numbers closed for 2018, the Kindle Global Select Fund has grown by some 20% in 2018, and that has been the growth rate for the past 2 years. So if you take this as one indicator, now about 30 to 35% of the books are in KU, and they do generate sales via the page reads. And if you take this as an indicator, unless Amazon is suddenly throwing money at authors, and we all know that the individual remuneration for an individual page count has been fairly flat if you look at it, then, and if you also assume that readers are not suddenly reading more pages of their books, then you have to assume that also the ebook market here has been growing as well. Now, having said this, it is important to see that view of the market, which is like bright sunshine for ebooks, is not shared by everybody. So if we go to the next slide and compare that with the view that the traditional publishers have of the ebooks, this takes here the US numbers as a comparison point there, the AAP, the Association of American Publishers, they also just reported their numbers for 2018 compared to 2017. And there you see, first of all, you see if you just look at the size of these bars, you see where they make their money. In value terms, they make about 7.8 billion in revenue in 2018, and the vast majority of it comes from hardback and paperback. So they don't look so much at ebooks. In fact, they also do not have so much an interest in ebook books growing so much. If you look here where their revenue source comes from. So in their point of view, when they look at their distribution channels, they measure a slight decrease in ebook sales, 3.6%. And so the question is, well, what is the truth? Well, the big problem with this sample here of the association is that this association, I think they have about 1,100 publishing companies that report their numbers, but they are all traditional publishers, and it doesn't include Amazon. And if you look at the market share of Amazon in the ebook market, you know, some reports say they have more than 80% of the ebook market, then you better go with the Amazon numbers. Now, before I go on, the one thing they do agree, though, is that we have a huge growth in audiobooks as well. And the trad publishers report a 37% growth here in 2017 to 2018. And we see similar developments on Amazon. Now, if we go to the next slide, and here Martin will perhaps a couple of times switch between this one and the next slide. Without going into all the details, what you have here listed on the left-hand side is a whole number of genres, about 30 main genres that Amazon has on its store. And the red color that you see is the share of the bestseller lists that are represent Kindle editions in their book bestseller list, which are actually not print bestseller lists, but cross-format. So you can gauge how much of the top 100 in any genre are what format. So red is ebook, the yellowish colors are print books, and blue is audiobook. Now this is 2017, and Martin is going to just flip to the next slide and perhaps to and fro a couple of times so you see the difference. If we go to the next one, Martin, you see how in 2018 the red color area has tremendously grown in the bestseller list, and so has coming from the right, the audiobook side. So if you look at Amazon store, they do sell paperbacks and hardbacks, but they sort of continue to get squeezed between ebooks and now increasingly also audiobooks. So from a pure Amazon perspective, we have here, if you look at the high-selling bestseller lists, especially the ones at the top, romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, literature and fiction in general, sci-fi and fantasy, they have an ebook penetration of here more than 70, partly more than 90%. So you do better look at ebooks. If you're more into self-help or children's book, you have to go to the bottom of the list. Take children's books as an example, which has 7% ebook penetration. So that's something to bear in mind. And especially if you're some of the nonfiction genres, also self-help, you know, their paperback is still a very important channel. But the big message is, if you look at these numbers, is that we have a continued growth on the Amazon platform of the ebook market as well as the audio market. All right. So if ebook is growing, the question is, and Kindle is such a dominant factor, the big question is, well, how big is the pot right now? What's the competition and what's in there for the indies before we go into the details? And there is good news and bad news. If we go to the next slide is, let's start on the left-hand side of this very picture where you have this mountain. And let's say this is the mountain to climb when it comes to bestseller rank. So the very tip of the mountain, the tip that you see at the very top, that would be the #1 sales rank. And then, you know, where the last camp is before the dead zone there, that's sales ranks 1 to 50,000. That's the top of the market. Out of currently some 5.4 million English-speaking Kindle titles. And every month we see another 70,000 titles come online. So the money is clearly made at the top. In fact, there are estimates that Amazon makes about 1 to 1.5 billion in revenue with ebooks and the corresponding royalty share, and 87% of that, so the vast amount, is in that very top. But anything from 1 to 50,000 experienced indie authors will know that to get up there into the top 20,000, top 10,000, top 5,000, top 2,000, top 1,000, if you have a good marketing and ad strategy, that's very much feasible. Now, the next thing we did, so if we go to the next slide, is we looked at, well, if you look at that pie, how much is currently being earned by indie authors? Now, usually we don't go more into like market niches and not so much the overall market picture, but I thought this analysis is very interesting, where we took the top 24,000 titles and monitored them over 3 months to get a fairly accurate picture. And here, basically, if you then look at the titles and their sales rank and the sales potential inherent in the sales rank, you can calculate, well, what is the royalty pie and what share do all the players have of that pie? And I think it's even a conservative estimate, because we looked at those books where you don't even have a publisher information, or it's only like one author with that publisher name. So very big indie authors who work like collaborations are not even in there. If you add it all together, we concluded that indie authors right now, well, indie authors rock. That's in the title. That's the conclusion. 37% of the market is captured by indie authors. Now, the next single largest market share is the big 5 combined. And then as a single entity, you have very strong and very fast growing the Amazon imprints. So first of all, a big congratulations to all the indie authors out there who are listening right now, because I think you guys did an incredible job. We look at genres every week, every month. We have certain genre reports where we look at top authors. And once you leave the big umbrella genres like mystery, thriller, suspense, or romance, and you go into the market niches, and we suddenly talk about whatever, Amish romance, or clean and wholesome romance, or clean and wholesome billionaire romance, or for mystery and thrillers, take female protagonist thrillers, non-cozy mystery. You see a lot of indie authors up there. So indie authors are agile, and they really reap quite a bit of that pie. So congratulations to everyone who's had a share in that. So this is the helicopter view, and now we want to dive deeper. But before we do, I just want to cover some very, very basics of Amazon data. Not much, and some of that will familiar for some, not so familiar for others. So let's quickly go through some basics that are often also missed by those who think they know these basics. So the first thing is, where can you look for useful data? If you go into the Amazon store, or the Kindle store to be more specific, once you click on the Kindle store, you always have to look at 3-4 different areas. First, and what you're probably most familiar with, is the search bar. So when you click on the search bar and click return, you immediately get some data. You get the competitive situation, you get the number of search hits, for example, for the books. If you then were to look at all the individual books that come up and sort them in sales rank order, you would also get a gauge of demand. Then on the left-hand side, there are the so-called browse categories, also very useful, because these will, as you will see in a second, will give you a measure of the level of competition in various genres down to very granular level. And once you click on a book, here in red, you get to individual book product pages, which have certain sales ranks information. And often forgotten are the bestseller lists, which you can click on this. I marked it here with this call out bestseller lists. It's sometimes a little hard to find. It's up there in the second row beneath the search bar. And this is where you get to all these partly very granular bestseller lists that show the book performance in a certain genre or a category for the top 100 respectively. Now, let's, however, clarify some important points here. If we go to the next slide, you will see, let's start with the individual book pages. Many people get this wrong. On an individual book page, once you scroll to the bottom, you will see actually two sales ranks. There are two pieces of information, and many indie authors sometimes get this wrong because the one at the bottom here is called the so-called category bestseller rank. So it will tell you, hey, here I'm a #1 in this travel book, hiking and camping, what is it here, walking category. And the person may have here, in this case, a #4 bestseller. Let's say it's a #1 bestseller in that category, and he sends this boasting emails around to the friends and family and Facebook posts, hey, I'm a #1 bestseller on Amazon. Well, true, but that very value is no measure whatsoever of the actual level of sales. In fact, the one thing to really look at whether a book is selling is the other value at the top, where it reads, in this case, number 23,000 something, out of, by the way, by now, more than 5.4 million titles. And that is the sales rank, which indicates a relative level of sales. Well, relative to what? Relative meaning compared to all the other 5.4 million books on Kindle. And this is, once you get there into the, say, top 5,000, top 1,000, top 100, that's where the big money is being made. And you can be a #1 in the best in a category, but not sell a single book a day, frankly. So beware of bestsellers that do not sell. Now, if we go to the next page, sales rank, we often get the question, well, how does it actually work? I could give you now a whole webinar on it. The first thing to note is there are human beings. The company Amazon A9 is a subsidiary of Amazon that takes care of the algorithms and sales ranks, and there are human beings behind this, and it's not rocket science. Well, perhaps it is rocket science, but it's no crystal ball or something. In fact, the very sales rank on Amazon is in its essence a very simple measure. What you see here is small little red dots, and these small little red dots plot the sales rank of a given book, not per day, but at any given hour over the day. So it looks like a jigsaw going up, down, and in its very simplicity, the sales rank is, if you look at where this blue call out is with this voting box, where the sales rank jumps up from, what is it here? I have to look around the camera, 108,000 jumps up to 31,000. That's the moment when the book had a couple of sales, or one sale perhaps only, here at this very low level of sales rank. And the simplicity of it is, purchases or downloads are like votes, but almost like in real politics, the votes devalue over time, meaning if you don't continue to sell something, you see the sales rank drops over time again. And in those instances where you get sales and downloads, the thing shoots up again. So important thing to see on this picture is you have to look at a book over time to make sense of whether it is selling or not. And what applies to a single book, you also have to do for a genre. So beware of going to the Amazon sales pages and see, oh, there's this green smoothie book up there, let's publish a book on green smoothies. That may not be the right strategy. You have to look at these averages over time and iron out peaks and valleys of this up and down motion here. All right, so next basic is, very briefly, search versus bestseller list. I'll do this very briefly. So if you browse through the categories on the left sidebar, what you get here is information about the size of categories and or the number of hits in a search if you put in a search. And you will be presented with all books for that given search or that given category, more or less. And the point here is, what Amazon presents you is not sorted by sales rank. It's not in descending order of sales. There are other factors, reviews, historical sales, etc., that comes into the algorithm, and many other points. However, on the right-hand side, if you click yourself through the bestseller lists, here you really get a gauge of demand for the top end of the market. You only at any given point see the top 100, and they are always sorted by sales rank. So no measure of reviews or price levels whatsoever. It's unit sales and downloads that drive that rank. And if we go to the next slide, you can then take that information and put it all together. So basically, the simplicity of all this is, from the left-hand side, you have book for one data on the product page. And what you can do for one book, these averages over time, you can look at for a group of books. And you can group these books. If you browse in the categories by categories or in the bestseller list, you can analyze these books for a certain search results, or you can do any custom grouping you want if you monitored your books that you search for over time. So, for example, we recently did a study on, say, female protagonist mystery and thrillers, for which there is no category, but you can identify the books and then monitor those over time and get a gauge of the market. So let's go to the next slide, and let me open the vault for you and share some real-time trends and data. So this is basically live data from the data we generate every month. It's for more than 7,000 categories where we monitor the sales, the growth, the price levels, price trends, Kindle Unlimited share, and many other things. So many of you who know K-lytics will know this, but we now won't go into tables. I will just share some conclusions with you. So Martin, let's dive right into the content here. Some hot genres and niche market news. All right. So first, to start off, I heard there is both genre fiction authors today listening. We also have the some self-help. I heard some other nonfiction genres. Well, once you talk ebooks and once you talk Kindle, you have to realize that the bulk of the sales, really the bulk of the sales, is in three major genres. It's romance, mystery, thriller, suspense here from the top, and science fiction and fantasy. Then you can compare those with the umbrella categories, where also many books are categorized: literature and fiction and nonfiction. Then also teen young adult, still a big and growing role. And then it really becomes more a niche once you go into religion, spirituality, biographies, you name it. That's where you have real niche markets. So the good news for those in the niche markets is, well, it is a niche, so competition may also not be as high. Although in a case like religion and spirituality, that's the category with the highest numbers of books in it, more than 500,000. So we have to look at both the sales side and the level of competition. So first lesson learned is romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, sci-fi, and fantasy, a bit of nonfiction in general, and teen young adult. That's where the money is being made. And also this data, well, I'm using in the next slide, Martin, very strong words in the headline, but this is really not to discourage you from a really good nonfiction book, but it's also knowing what not to do, because you see there are some very big categories, very technical categories, where, say, medical authorities upload all their books, and there are hundreds of thousands of books in there, but no sales. So that's something to watch out. And just to have a little fun, if you go to the next slide, if we look at like 7,000 categories, the worst selling categories over the last 12 months are, so the winner is nonfiction, crafts, hobbies, and home, crafts, hobbies, woodworking, decoys. I also had to look it up. So Amazon has a category on duck decoys, which are man-made objects resembling a real ducks, which I think you use in hunting. So pretty funny. So if you want to be a #1 bestseller, you may want to go for this one. Crafts, hobbies, mobiles. You get the idea. I mean, you find the most obscure nonfiction genres out there. And well, if you write for authority rather than sales, because you say you're the authority for duck decoys, then you may want to write a book and present yourself as a #1 bestseller. When the category lists history, are they referring to nonfiction or historical fiction? Well, most of the historical fiction is actually buried in literature and fiction. Literature and fiction was just a question. That's mostly referring to nonfiction books. The data you will find a subcategory such as historical romance will be within the romance category. All right, so then you can drill down to the next level. If we go to the next slide, I mean, you guys will be interested in, well, let's leave the level of categories once you start measuring the next level down. Here I list for you that says, write the live data from February. What are the highest selling subcategories? Now, on a subcategory level, it can still be fairly broad. So you have here literature and fiction, women's fiction, which in essence, you see a lot of romance in there if you look into the bestseller list. The top ones are still very broadly defined: contemporary fiction, genre fiction, then contemporary romance. This may be not that helpful, but it just confirms here romance, mystery, thriller, suspense, then with its big branches, thriller, suspense, and mystery, then literature and fiction. But then you see it already starts getting a little more niche. We have here, for example, romance, mystery, and suspense, romantic suspense, big growing thing. We look at some more details in a second. And then it becomes a little more granular. But still, these are here the real big ones where most of the money sits. And children ebooks, by the way, that is a bit of an outlier here right now due to still the tail end of some holiday season data, which it's a very seasonal business from December, still probably reflected in the data. So this is what happens on the subcategory level. And the question that you also have to ask automatically is, well, this is the level of sales, but with how many other authors am I competing for the market? Because mind you, one thing is, as soon as you say I'm an indie author, as soon as you say indie, you're the same second you are a publisher. And once you say you're a publisher, you're in there for business. Once you're in there for business, you are exposed to what is called a market. And the market has supply and it has demand. And you want to have areas where you ideally have a high level of demand, meaning lots of readers who buy your book, but not necessarily competing with, say, 34,000 other billionaire romance novels that are already out there. So let's have a closer look just for the fun of it. And the big categories, as we just mentioned, the biggest one would be religion and spirituality as an umbrella category with like 500,000 books in it. But from a competition point of view, and if we go to the next slide, a category can be as big as 500,000, but it can also be as tiny as one book in the category. So just for the fun of it, the least competitive categories that we have in the database would be things like commercial science illustrations, silk and screen batik, travel books about United States, Mid-Atlantic, or home improvement books about roofing. So again, here, this is an extreme example just to make the point. There will probably virtually be no sales in there because there are no readers who are requesting these. And that is the reason why you only have one book. And there are even bestsellers that have no books in it where you could immediately be a #1 bestseller. There is no competition there. And if we go to the next slide and, in words, summarize the whole Kindle market, well, you have more than 7,000 genres out there. And that's a picture I once presented at a conference, which I think was very well received, because in the end of the day, what books you write, the words you form, the sentences you use, the stories you craft, the possibilities are limitless. So there are opportunities abound. And if you take a commercial point of view and say every little star on this very picture is a genre or a market niche, a category, whatever you call it. In this case, I'd call it a category so you can measure it. Then you have a huge market. So let's assume every little star is a category. And let's say these categories exist for real. So if we go to the next page, you can actually plot every little star as a dot on one picture. And this may look like super complicated, but it's actually very simple. And those of you who know K-lytics, that's our trademark graph. We call it the K-lytics book strategy map because every little dot has a position on this graph. The further it is to the right, the more titles there are in the very category. The higher up it is, the higher the sales. The more you go to the left, the less competition you have. So at the very left-hand side, it would be, anything like 10 to 100 titles in the category. And if you go down, you see the sales rank gets worse and worse and worse. So there's like a green area, an orange area, and a red area. The red area or dark orange area is anything categories where the top 20 books of the category alone have only an average sales rank of around 50,000, which does not translate into a lot of sales at all. So this is your map, and you have lots of opportunities. And I selected a couple of those for you today to basically share here in this webinar and Q&A. A couple of the things we see here. So first of all, if we take go to the next slide and look at romance. Romance right now, and now I'm not labeling like every dot, but to give you a little bit of a feel. First thing is, good news is you see a lot of these categories, the romance categories, of which there are 100 or so. These are just the ones within the main romance branch, and there are other romance related ones that we discovered in our romance genre report. So you see here, the big romance things would be things like paranormal romance, extremely high sales, so it's high up on the graph, but you see it's pretty much to the right. There are more than, I think, 40,000 titles out there already. So here you have to have a bit of an Amazon marketing budget, AMS marketing budget, to get traction. In the middle, it gets more niche. We followed the last 3 years a very important niche, clean and wholesome romance. It's doing extremely well. It has grown a lot, and it's not like too crowded. We've seen a trend of like mainstream romance going into the clean area. You know, people perhaps get a little bit tired of 50 Shades of Grey, and it's also very hard to market erotica on Amazon. Especially, I think ads are virtually impossible. And then here to the left-hand side, things like teen, young adult, romance, science fiction, and dystopian, you know, where you have the Bella, very successful indies like Bella Forests of the world. Well, you know, it's extremely high sales, but it's a teen, young adult niche market. It's a niche within a niche. And well, this is basically how this works. And you see many successful indie authors, they pick their bets and they start dominating certain niches. And what you then can take into account as well is, if we go to the next slide, Martin, is, well, things also change over time. And if you look at things over time, then the thing becomes even more interesting, because take this one dot we just had, which was teen, young adult romance, science fiction and dystopian, where you see, you know, after like 2015, when sort of Hunger Games and all the other blockbusters sort of start trailing off, so did the book sales here, right? But we've seen here in May 2018 towards last year, if you plot a trend line through the peaks and valleys, then you suddenly get an upward trend again. And we see the same, if you look at this in Google Trends for the same period of time, you will find a similar hockey stick. So we look forward to seeing what's going to be happening in that one in the year 2019. Another example for evolutions over time in romance, and we just had the question here whether this includes the free books. No, we're solely looking at what people have to pay for. There is also the free charts, but they are not part of this map at this point in time. I should potentially generate one, but I presume it's going to look fairly similar genre-wise. So here, another really strong genre these days, although it's very big, and it's you have contestants, the trad publishers, you have the Amazon imprints having a huge share in it, and you have very successful indie authors here as well, is what you might call romantic suspense. The category is more like named romantic mystery and suspense, and here is the sub-category, romance, mystery, and suspense mystery. Same you get if you have the suspense one. It's basically the same books. And the 12 months improved sales ranks for about 46%, and it's currently very strong. You have to look at the bestseller list. There are a couple of very good authors in there. Other strong categories here in romance that we see in our genre report we recently did. Clean and wholesome is doing well. Amazon just introduced a new category, action and adventure romance. New adult and college continues to do well, and so on and so forth. All right, so let's look a bit at sci-fi. You know, we have some sci-fi authors on here today, I heard. Let's go to the next slide and look at these. So sci-fi and fantasy, also before we go into the details, one thing you immediately see in sci-fi is it is a genre where you have lots of green dots. The good news about the green dots is they are ranging from both hot sales. Sales is for us really tiny categories with less than 2,000 titles, to niche markets, to what we call the hot mainstream. But you also see there are a number of things that are in the more red area. Some of these are also non-fiction, but you have to have a closer look. So, things like military science fiction has just left the niche stage and has become more already like a mainstream genre. But you see that is the type of genres where you see very successful authors out there from the sci-fi community who really carve out their space. Is it superhero fantasy? Is it military science fiction? Is it space opera? And many of these people you will find write in a very authentic way. Well, superhero, not because they're a superhero, but if you have military sci-fi writers, partly they have a military background. Another client of mine is a pilot. So there is some affinity for what people write about, and they match this with the supply and demand of a certain market niche. Let's go at some trend just as an example. So next slide would be here, humorous fantasy as an example. There is a bestseller list which came out of nowhere, like 18 months ago, average sales rank some here 20,000, 15,000, and it's been climbing. You start looking at these categories and then you see the actual books in it. Sometimes they're a little bit polluted, but still you see what books are driving the trend. So in this case, you see urban fantasy books that are classic urban fantasy, but have a bit of a humorous punch potentially in it. Game literature, lit RPG type of books that also sometimes have a bit of a humorous aspect in it. So this is what you see when you look at things over time. All right, let's look at another very big one. Let's look at mystery, thriller, suspense here. Now, mystery, thriller, suspense I love it, not just because I read it, but because you see this very high concentration of green dots, which is good news. They're all in the green area. And these categories, they currently just offer a lot of opportunity. Yes, they're heavily contested by the traditional publishers. And yes, some of these genres have high, say, barriers of entry. So if you want to go into legal thrillers, which is one of these great green dots, you have to have legal knowledge and passion about the subject. And yes, you are competing potentially, well, not potentially, with the Grishams of the world, but there are also indie authors who have that knowledge and who successfully compete in such things. So also here, Martin, let's look at some trends that we've seen here. If we go to the next slide, just as one example of these many green dots, what has moved over time. And I was surprised because I thought, on Netflix and whatever the police procedural type of TV series, haven't they tailed off? Well, book-wise, we've seen still a very remarkable increase of the last 18 months. And it's already ranking extremely high, but you see that the sales rank has improved on average by another 36%. So have a look at those categories. You find some very successful authors in there, by the way, who are with an Amazon imprint, who are performing really well in these type of categories. Others that do really well are within MTS. We see a bit this whole trend to domestic thrillers, so psychological thriller that are in a small environment, household, neighborhood, etc. Vigilante justice, so the tale still of this whole Jack Reacher type of things has been doing well. And we're just updating our study of female protagonist thrillers. Now, cozy mystery is not on there, but they're very successful still. Cozy mystery for the usually elder readers in there. And so lots of opportunity in mystery, thriller, and suspense. Now, before we go into the Q&A, one last word is I didn't dive deep now into fiction versus nonfiction. Overall, as said, the nonfiction ebook sales are lower. than the fiction sales, as indicated here by the blue line. But actually, the last 12 months has seen quite an increase of nonfiction. Nonfiction had the problem of so many junk books in the gold rush days of Kindle Unlimited coming online. But I think we see now here a bit of a professionalization also in the nonfiction area of the Kindle market, and also more professional marketing techniques that are being used there. So it's going up. Within those, you have genres such as, for example, business and money titles were really bad about 18 months ago, and now we saw a strong incline. Within self-help, hugely crowded. You will have to look at what are the themes and pockets. Well, if you go into a growing thing like keto diet, well, great, but it's also getting a bit crowded by now. And never forget, especially in the nonfiction era, if you write for the authority, you may be more after the sales rank, so that #1 bestseller badge, than for actual sales, because you make your sales as a consultant or with an information product, website, YouTube channel, you name it. So also here, don't forget a multi-channel strategy and print books to add to the equation. All right. So we're close to the Q&A, and I'm happy to answer those, but perhaps to conclude, what do you do with all this? So let me conclude in saying, if you are a writer and you publish your book, you become an author, very simply put. If you publish it yourself, you're a self-publisher. If people buy the books, you are a professional, right? If you do it for a living. And once you are an indie publisher, the second you use the word publisher in your designation, and get involved in publishing yourself or with the help of others such as Reedsy, but you are in essence a business. And as a business, you will look at sales, you will look at your cost, and hopefully return a profit. And once you talk about profit, you will talk about markets where you have others who want to have the same profit, that's competition, and you have readers who represent your demand. And looking at this data can help you with basically two things. The one is what to write. So if you have a clean sheet of paper, shall I go into nonfiction, into fiction? If I'm in fiction and I am in romance, I'm in paranormal romance, well, what is the next thing? Is it the shifters, the vampires, the ghosts, the angels, you name it? This is where the data can help you. And on a more technical level, obviously, you can measure also keywords, you can measure categories. If you have the book not in the right categories, and by the way, you can have your book in 10 categories, not just in 2 as presented by the Kindle upload dashboard. You just have to email Amazon. The categories can help with exposure. And in some cases, Amazon even forces search results into certain categories. So if you're, especially if you type something such as paranormal romance into the search bar, what Amazon presents you is all the books in the category paranormal romance and below. So if the book is not in paranormal romance or its respective niches, it would never even show up. So this is where the data can help, what to write and how to market. And
yeah, thank you so much. Until the next time we have a Reedsy Live, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.